The Concordat wrote her off in an afternoon. They were certain she would never move again. I flew her out of their yard 10 months later. My name is Cal Merrick, and I run a salvage yard on a rock with no name at the ragged human edge of the map. And I want to be honest about the shape of this before I tell it, because the version that got told about me is wrong in a way that flatters me, and I have never liked it. People think the hard part was nerve. The hard part was arithmetic. After the arithmetic, it was 10 months of work. And after the work, it was one word I would not let a man change. That is the whole account. The rest is detail, and I am going to give you the detail, including the parts I was not in the room for. And every time I hand you one of those, I will tell you who handed it to me, because I am a salvage man, and I do not sell a part without saying where it came from. The impound field at Thren Station is the largest ship graveyard in that arm of the galaxy, and the crews who work it do not call it a graveyard because the Concordat keeps a cleaner word. They call it Reclamation Berth 7. I have walked it twice, once at 30 and once at 51, both times to pull injector housings off hulls nobody wanted. It runs 40 kilometers along the station's spine, a slow river of dead ships held in place by tethers and old gravity, and the light out there is the color of a screen left on too long. Ships arrive at berth 7 when their owners stop paying, when their crews die, when a war ends and the winners have no use for what the losers built. Most are cut apart inside a year. A few sit for a decade. One had been sitting for 214 years, and that one is where this begins. She was a Sarn-class heavy cruiser, 900 meters from bow to engine bell, and the Vekant who built her had given her a name that did not translate and a hull number that did. Kavu 9. Her reactor had been cold since a battle nobody living remembers. 4,000 crew died aboard her in a single afternoon, and the Concordat logged them as a rounding error in a war that had produced larger ones. I have her assessment file in a drawer in my galley. It says what those files always say about ships like her. Reactor cold, 6 hull breaches, life support failed, recoverability 0%. The man who signed it was named Drael Vorkessen, chief assessor for the Thren district, and he had signed 9,000 of them across a long and unremarkable career. He gave me the morning he signed it himself, 4 years ago, in a room with a window, and I am handing it over the way he handed it to me, which is to say, without excuses. He was not cruel and he was not lazy. He was correct almost every time, which is a different and more dangerous thing. He walked the berth in a pressure suit that smelled faintly of the last person who had worn it, and he stood in front of Kavu 9 the way a coroner stands in front of a body, with respect and without hope. His junior assessor floated beside him with a reader. "Confirm the count," Drael said. The junior read it off. 6 breaches, core reading flat, no recoverable systems. Drael nodded and did not answer right away. He told me there was a smell in that suit and a stain on the reader screen that nobody had cleaned in years, and that against the dead hull of a warship that had once carried 4,000 souls, those 2 small facts were the only living things in the scene. "List her at scrap," Drael said. "Clear the berth." That is the whole of what he said. The auction that followed was a formality run by a machine, and this is the part everybody skips, so I am going to slow down, because the auction is not the background of the story. The auction is the story. The Concordat posted Kavu 9 to the open reclamation market with a reserve price and a countdown, and for 11 standard days the countdown ran and the reserve fell, and nothing happened. Salvage guilds looked at her and passed. She was too big to cut cheaply and too dead to fly. The Vekant would not touch a ship from a war they had lost. The Thren had no use for a hull that size. Here is the arithmetic that emptied that berth of buyers, and it is not complicated. The refined metal in Kavu 9 was worth about 70,000 grams of tellurite delivered to a Thren foundry. Cutting her cost more than that. A guild would have burned better than 90,000 grams in torch time, berth fees, and the hazard bond the Concordat requires on any hull with an unvented reactor. And at the end of it, they would have carried away 70. Every professional in the trade ran that sum and got the same answer, which is that the ship was worth less than nothing, and they were right. The Concordat's reserve formula is mass value less the district's own disposal cost, which is how a 900-meter warship came to have a floor price of 41,000 grams of refined tellurite. And at that floor, the system stopped, because below scrap there is nothing. On the 11th day, the listing showed a single line under the price. Bids received, 0. Nobody bid on it. That is the sentence the whole galaxy would repeat later in a dozen languages, always with the same small pause before it. Nobody bid on it. Drayle saw the 0 and felt nothing, because a 0 on a dead ship was the correct and expected reading. And a man who has been right 9,000 times does not question the 9,001st. He initialed the disposal order. He assigned Kavu 9 to the cutting queue. And then on the morning the torches were scheduled to start, my tug, the Delgado, eased into the berth without ceremony, matched the reserve to the last decimal, and paid it in full. The transaction cleared in 9 seconds. It cleared in 9 seconds because I had spent 11 days deciding and about 4 minutes doing. The buyer was listed as C. Merrick, sole proprietor of a salvage yard the Concordat's records placed at the ragged human edge of the map, a place their charts mark as low traffic and lower value. Drayle read the name once. He told me he did not read it again. A human had bought a dead Vekant warship for the price of its metal, and to a man who had signed 9,000 correct assessments, that was not a warning. It was a customer doing something foolish with his own money. Take her off the cutting queue, Drayle told the junior. Release her to the buyer. Let him tow his scrap home. The junior logged it. Somewhere in the station, a torch that had been warming shut back down. And in a private message queue that Drayle would not open for 3 days, an old engineer named Tone had already begun to write the words that would follow the Concordat for the rest of its history. The words that started with a warning nobody wanted and ended with a phrase nobody could forget. Tow him home, Drayle said again, half to himself, and turned away from the largest dead thing in the yard as if he had already forgotten it was there. He had not forgotten it. He told me he thought about it every day afterward. He simply did not know that yet. The order was given, the berth was clearing, and the countdown that mattered, the one nobody at Thren Station had thought to start, had just begun to run. I was not in the room for what came next, so I will tell you where I got it. Coordinator Yeln read most of it aloud to me out of the archived minutes, and Tone himself filled in the rest by message the year after. And I have compared the two, and they agree. 3 days after the sale, the Concordat's Regional Assessment Board met in a room with no windows and worse coffee, and the only item near the bottom of the agenda that would matter was raised by the one person in the room with no authority to raise it. His name was Tone. He was old even by Vekant standards, a reactor engineer who had been retired into an advisory seat the way old dogs are retired onto porches, present, respected, and largely ignored. He had spent 40 years lighting and killing fusion cores, and he had asked to speak about the disposal of Kavu 9. Drayle chaired the meeting and gave him the floor, mostly out of courtesy. The ship is sold, Drayle said. The matter is closed. Tone stood anyway. The assessment says the core is dead, he said. I have read the assessment. The core is not dead. It is dormant. Around the table, patience thinned. Dormant and dead read the same on your instruments, Tone went on, because your instruments measure output, and a dormant SARN core produces no output. But a SARN core does not die when it goes cold. It seals itself. It waits. He set an old data slate on the table, the kind nobody uses anymore, and on it was a schematic 2 centuries out of print. I spent 9 years of my life inside the ignition logic of that class, he said. Not designing it. I was not born when it was designed. Refitting it. The last 3 Sarn hulls the yards ever pulled in for a core overhaul. I had my hands in all 3, and I read the build notes of the people who did design it. And those people were not idiots. They built that logic to survive exactly the kind of afternoon that ship survived. The crew died. The core went to sleep. That is not the same thing. An assessor 2 seats down asked the obvious question. If it could be woken, why did no salvage guild wake it? Because no guild wanted to, Tone said. It costs more to wake than to cut, and it costs more to cut than the metal is worth. Every professional in the reclamation trade knows both of those numbers. So every professional made the same calculation and reached the same answer. And the answer was profitable, and it was also wrong. He looked at Drayle. You did not assess a dead ship, he said. You assessed a sleeping one and wrote dead because dead is cheaper to file. Dead is a paperwork word. The room did not like that, and Drayle liked it least of all, because it was aimed at the one thing a career of 9,000 correct signatures had never prepared him to hear, which was that being correct on paper and being correct in fact are not always the same country. He kept his voice level. The buyer is a human, he said, a single human at a scrapyard on the edge of nowhere. Even if the core could wake, and I do not grant that, no human operation possesses the metallurgy, the reactor discipline, or the control theory to restart Vekant fusion. We could barely do it, and we invented it. He was not wrong about the metallurgy. I want that on the record too. We did not have it. We worked around not having it for 10 months, and it nearly killed us twice. Tome did not sit down. That is what I came to warn you about, he said. Not the ship, the buyer. You have written him off the same way you wrote off the ship, in an afternoon, on a chart, because his corner of the map is marked low value. I have met humans. They are a young species and a poor one, and they lose most of the fights they pick. But there is a thing they do that never shows up in an assessment. When everyone tells them a thing is impossible, a certain number of them hear it as a schedule. Drayle almost smiled. He did not. Note the objection in the minutes, he said. Register the sale as final. The board voted. The vote was not close. The disposal of Kavu 9 to C. Merrick, sole proprietor, for the sum of 41,000 grams of refined tellurite, scrap price to the gram, was recorded as complete and irreversible under Concordat salvage law, Article 9, which holds that a reclamation sale, once cleared, transfers full and permanent title regardless of the buyer's use of the asset. That article was written to protect scrap dealers from spreads who wanted their metal back once prices rose. Nobody in the room noticed that it protected this scrap dealer just as completely, and in exactly the same words, if what he towed home turned out not to be scrap at all. The minutes closed. Tone gathered his obsolete slate. On his way out, he stopped by Drayle's chair and said one more thing, quietly, the way a man says a thing he does not expect to be believed. When it flies, he said, remember that I told you it could. Drayle looked up. It will not fly, he said. Then you have nothing to remember, Tone answered, and left. Drayle sat alone in that windowless room for a while after, with the worst coffee in the district going cold in front of him. And he told me he spent it telling himself the old engineer was sentimental about a ship he had once had his hands in, which was human of him, which was the wrong word. And Drayle noticed it was the wrong word and could not stop having thought it. The sale was final. The title had transferred. 41,000 grams had changed hands, and with them, though not one Concordat official believed it, 900 meters of sleeping warship, and a warning that would be quoted back to them, word for word, at the worst possible time. Dead is a paperwork word. He would hear it again. He did not know how soon. I took delivery at the edge of the human sphere, at a yard called Halloran and Merrick Salvage, that sits on a rock with no name and a docking ring held together by decades of improvisation and spite. I was 58 then, broad in the shoulder and slow in the hands, and I had bought and sold more dead ships than most navies have ever launched. I watched Kavu 9 come in on the tow, 900 meters of Vekant steel eclipsing my little station's lights one section at a time. And I did not whoop, and I did not grin. I drank the coffee in my hand, which was bad, and I said the only thing I said out loud: bigger in person. The tow crew that brought her the last stretch was run by a Concordat contractor named Grask, an overseer of berthing who worked the boundary yards and enjoyed the small power the job gave him. Grask did not like humans, did not like the run out to the edge, and did not like handing 900 meters of anything to a man he had already filed as a fool. He tried the thing men like him always try. There is a deorbit fee, Grask said over the channel, a hazard fee, a tethering surcharge for hulls over 500 meters. These were not in the sale. I did not answer him. A young woman on my crew did. Her name was Rosa Delgado. She was the reason the tug is called the Delgado, and she had been reading Concordat salvage law on the long flight out because that is the kind of person she is. The fees you listed apply to disposal transfers, overseer, she said. This is a completed sale under Article 9. Title has passed. The hull is private property on private approach. Bill us and we contest it. And when we contest it, your own board has to admit in writing that the ship you are surcharging as a hazard is the ship they certified as inert scrap. Pick one. There was a silence on the channel. Grask, who had bullied 100 edge yards into paying fees they did not owe, discovered that this one had read the rules he was inventing surcharges out of, and he did the thing bullies do when the arithmetic turns. He released the tethers a little too fast, logged the delivery as complete, and left. It was possibly the pettiest handoff in the history of the arrangement, and it was also the last time anyone from the Concordat treated that yard as beneath their notice. Rosa cut the channel and looked at me. He is going to report that a human quoted salvage law at him, she said. Good, I said. Let the records show we can read. I put my crew aboard the dead cruiser that first shift. All 6 of us, headlamps in a 900-meter tomb, and I did not know what I was standing inside of. I want that clear because everything after this depends on it. I could not read one line of that ship, not a placard, not a panel, not a warning stencil. I knew where a reactor gallery has to be on any hull that size, because physics does not care what species you are, and that was the sum total of my expertise aboard my own property. Tone had already said the true thing in a windowless room 3 days earlier, and nobody had listened, and I would not read those minutes for the better part of a year. The core was not dead, it was sleeping. Somewhere in the dark of Kavu 9, behind 2 centuries of dust and a war's worth of silence, a Sarn-class fusion heart sat sealed and waiting. And when Rosa's team finally reached the reactor gallery and swept their lamps across the containment ring, the diagnostic patch she slapped onto the primary loop housing came back not with a flat line, but with a single, faint, impossible number that had read 0 for 214 years, and now, under her hand, read something else. Nobody bid on it. That is the phrase I counted on when I emptied most of my working capital into a dead alien warship. And I counted on it not because it made me rich, but because it made me free. Nobody bid means nobody is coming back for her. Nobody bid means no guild is going to underbid me next quarter. Nobody bid means the price will never rise, because the price was never about the ship. It was about the cost of cutting her, and that cost was not going to fall. 2 mornings after she arrived, I gathered the whole crew in the yard's only heated compartment, a bay that doubles as a galley and a machine shop, and a place where the coffee is made by a machine older than one of the crew. There were 6 of us. Me, who owns the yard. Tom Halloran, 70, Spacer's Hands, who has had his name on the sign for 30 years. Rosa Delgado, engineer, 34, who reads law for fun and reactors for money. Ada Osei, systems in code, who can talk to a machine longer than she can stand to talk to most people. Frank, a welder with 1 lung of his own and 1 a colony hospital grew for him, who speaks about 4 times a day. and a 19-year-old dock rat named Danny who had washed up at the yard 2 years back and stayed because I had not asked why. 6. That was the whole company that would do the thing an entire galaxy had already decided was not worth doing. I put the honest number on the board with an old physical marker that squeaks. "Rosa," I said, "tell them what it costs." Rosa told them, and she told them in grams, because grams do not argue. To wake the core, seal the 6 breaches, rebuild life support for a fraction of the hull, and get the ship to move under her own power one time, she called it 260,000 grams of refined tellurite, and a timeline she would not put under 14 months if everything went right, which it would not. Then Tom put up what we actually had. 58,000 grams was every liquid gram the yard had made in 20 years. 41,000 of it was already gone into the hull. 17,000 left. He said we could cut and sell the yard's other 3 derelicts, our entire standing inventory, and clear 96,000. He said he could borrow 70,000 against the yard, the ring, and the Delgado, and that he could not borrow 1 gram more because there was nothing left to pledge. 17 and 96 and 70 is 183,000. Rose's number was 260. We were 77,000 grams short before we picked up a single tool. "The alien tech we cannot read is the whole ship," Rosa said. "Not part of it, all of it. The control language, the reactor logic, the damage control net. We are illiterate in there. We are going to be relearning how to read while standing inside a machine that can kill us. And one more thing," she said, and she said it at Danny, but loud enough for the room. "Nobody in this yard says wait. Wait is what a thing does at the bottom of a gravity well, and we are not going to be at the bottom of one. What kills you is load. What the structure carries, where it carries it, in which direction, and for how long. A frame that holds compression for 2 centuries will tear like wet paper under 1/10 of that in the wrong shear. When you tell me a member is fine, tell me the load path and tell me the load case. Weight is a bathroom word." Tom asked the only sensible question. "Then why, Cal?" I did not answer with a speech. I answered with arithmetic, because that is the only language I trust in a room. A working Sarn cruiser is worth more than everything human space has ever sold the Concordat combined, I said. But that is not why. If we cut her up, we spend 90,000 grams in torch time to recover 70, which is the same sum every guild ran. And we die owing money, and the last thing this yard ever does is prove the assessor right. If we wake her, one of 2 things happens. Either we fail and we die owing money, which is the identical ending, so on the arithmetic it costs us nothing to try. Or we do not fail. I set the marker down. And if we do not fail, I said, then every species that filed us under low value has to open the file again. The 77,000 we do not have, we are going to make with our hands. Frank draws his own seal stock instead of buying it. Rosa builds her own patches. We do not rebuild life support for 900 meters. We rebuild it for 6 compartments, and we live in 6 compartments. I did not raise my voice once. That was the thing that never made it into any Concordat assessment. And I am not being modest about it. I am being accurate. Then I did a small thing while I said it. I walked to the wall of the bay where the Concordat had spray-marked the hull section they cut free for testing. A stenciled Vekant glyph that means condemned, and I did not make a show of it. Danny had already been at that wall for an hour that morning with a pot of the yard's ugly gray primer, and he had painted the glyph out. Not defiantly, not with a slogan under it, he had just covered it, the way you cover a stain on a table before company comes, and gone back to work. And when I noticed and looked at him, he shrugged and said, "It was ugly," and said nothing else about it. Not that day, and not years later when a historian tried to make it mean something. That was the whole ceremony. A kid painting over the word condemned because he thought it was ugly. Then I split the work. Rosa took the reactor. Ada took the control language. Frank took the breaches. Tom took logistics and money, which meant lying to creditors gently. Danny took whatever needed carrying, which was everything. And I took the thing a captain takes, which is the weight of having asked. And Rosa can have that one, because that load is not structural. Before we broke up, I said the last thing, and it became the second phrase we live by. She does not have to be a warship, I said. She does not have to be beautiful. She does not have to last. She only has to fly once. Once proves it. Once is a fact nobody can file away. It only has to fly once. We went to work that shift and did not stop for a long time. And out at Thren's station, in the windowless part of his memory, Drael vor Kessen filed the disposal of Kavu 9 as complete and turned to the next dead ship in a very long line, certain, as he had been correct 9,000 times, that he would never hear that hull number again. He would hear it in 7 months from a junior analyst he had never met. He would hear it from an admiral in 10. And the first he would know of any of it was a number on a scan he would refuse, twice, to believe. The next 4 months were attrition, and attrition is a quiet enemy because it never delivers a single blow you can point to. It takes a little at a time. A power coupling Frank rebuilt 3 times before it held. A batch of sealant that cured wrong in the cold and had to be cut out and redone. 4 days of work erased in an afternoon. Our own reactor, the small human one that runs the station, threw a fault in week 9 and dropped us to emergency power for 2 days. And we did the delicate work of learning alien fusion by the light of failing human fusion, which nobody found funny at the time, and everyone found funny later. And in month 3, the arithmetic got worse. A creditor on the human side called in a note early because he had heard, correctly, that Merrick had spent everything on a dead ship. 22,000 grams, due in 30 days, out of the 70 Tom had borrowed. He could not be talked down. We paid him because the alternative was losing the ring, and paying him cost us a month of margin we had already spent on paper. Rosa needed the ship's original ignition schematics, and there was exactly one place in the galaxy that might still hold them, which was the Concordat's own technical archive, the same institution that had certified the ship as scrap. So she filed a records request, properly, through the channels, a formal application for the maintenance documentation of hull Kavu 9, Sarn class, citing the completed sail and her rights as the owner's engineer. 9 days later, the Concordat replied. The reply was a single line. Technical records for assets designated non-recoverable are not retained. She read it twice because it was absurd, and then she filed again, more precisely, asking specifically for the archive bill documentation which she had reason to believe still existed. 11 days after that, the Concordat replied again, and the reply was the same line, character for character, as if a machine had answered, and perhaps one had. Technical records for assets designated non-recoverable are not retained. She pinned both replies to the wall of the shop next to the painted-over glyph, and she did not say anything about them, and neither did I. But those 2 identical lines became a kind of clock in that room, a reminder that the institution which had declared the ship dead would now also decline to help us prove otherwise, and would do it in the same words twice, because an institution that has decided something is not worth its attention will keep declining to look in exactly the same tone of voice every time. It was the most consistent thing the Concordat did in the whole affair. It kept saying no in one sentence. So Rosa built the schematic herself. That is worth more than the sentence I just gave it. She had no drawings and no build notes and no help. And over the next 4 months, she took the ignition assembly apart by hand, photographed every component, measured every clearance, traced every line back to a pump or a valve or a field coil, and drew what it had to be from what it was, and from physics, which is the same in every language. 22 sheets. She was wrong about 4 of them and found out she was wrong the hard way, and corrected them. And that is what a reconstruction is. Nobody gave us that document. We made it out of a machine and a pencil. Morale moved the way morale moves, not in a line but in weather. There was a bad week in month 3 when Frank's grown lung gave him trouble in the suit, and he could not do the breach work for 6 days. And the schedule we all pretended was real slipped in a way that made it hard to pretend anymore. There was a night Danny sat on the galley floor with his back against the old coffee machine because his legs had, in his words, decided they were done. And Tom sat down next to him on the cold deck without a word, and they drank the bad coffee together until the kid could stand. And there was the day, in the middle of all of it, that changed the arithmetic. Rosa had spent 19 weeks on the reactor, not lighting it, understanding it, learning what the containment ring did, what the injectors were, what the seals had done when the crew died, how the core had put itself to sleep. And on a Tuesday that was not otherwise different from any other Tuesday, she ran a controlled pressure test on the core's primary coolant loop, a gentle one, a knock on a door rather than an attempt to break it down. And she watched the diagnostic patch, and the core answered. Not with power, not with fire, with a pressure response, a small internal shift, the reactor equivalent of a heartbeat felt through a wrist. It came from a dead thing. She called me to the reactor gallery and showed me the reading without a word, because she did not trust her voice. And I looked at the number for a long time. For 214 years, that loop had read 0. It read 0 on Drell's instruments. It read 0 at the auction, and on the disposal order, and in the minutes, and in every place a number can be written. Rosa's patch now read 4% of nominal loop pressure. 4% is not power. 4% is not anywhere near power. You could get 4% out of a hand pump, and Rosa said so out loud, twice, because she is the kind of engineer who says the deflating thing before anyone else can get to it. Nobody in that gallery cared. We did not care because 0 is a wall and 4 is a door. And the difference between them is not 4. It is everything. A sealed loop that still holds 4% after 2 centuries is a loop that did not fail. A loop that did not fail is a core that shut itself down on purpose. And a machine that shuts itself down on purpose has, somewhere inside it, the logic to start again. I put my hand flat on the cold containment ring, the way you put a hand on the flank of an animal that is not dead after all. And I said the only thing I said, not yet. Rosa understood me. It meant we would not push it. It meant the core would wake on our terms or not at all. It meant a discipline I would enforce on every one of us, and most of all on the one of us who would not be able to bear it. She logged the reading, 4%, month 4, day 19. She did not tell the creditors. She did not tell the Concordat. She told no one outside the 6, and the 6 kept it the way you keep the one card that changes the game, close, in quiet, and out of the light, while a dead ship in a scrapyard on the edge of the map began, 1% at a time, to remember that it had once been alive. The wall we hit was not the reactor. Rosa had the reactor breathing by month 5, still dormant, still sealed, but responsive, a patient in a coma whose fingers now twitched when you spoke. The wall was language. To take the core from 4% to ignition, someone had to give it the sequence, the exact ordered string of commands that tells a Sarn heart to open its throat and burn. And that sequence is written in Vekant reactor control code, a language built by a species that thinks in ways we do not, for a machine we never designed, guarded by interlocks that would refuse a wrong instruction and, Rosa believed, punish a badly wrong one. Ada Osei had been living inside that language for 5 months, and she had mapped a great deal of it, the way you can map a city's streets without speaking the tongue on the signs. She knew what most of the commands did. She could not make the core except a new one. Every ignition string she built, the interlocks rejected. Not because the grammar was wrong, because the ship did not know her. The Sarn control logic, Ada finally worked out, does not authenticate a command by its correctness. It authenticates by its cadence. The original crews did not type ignition sequences. They keyed them in a rhythm, a specific timing between commands that the ship had learned from its own operators over years, a signature as personal as a heartbeat, and the ship checks the rhythm before it checks the words. A perfect sequence in the wrong rhythm reads as an imposter. And the operators who knew the rhythm had all died in one afternoon 214 years ago. That was the wall. Not translate a language, reproduce the heartbeat of a dead crew. Ada worked it head-on for 3 weeks and got nowhere, because a heartbeat is not the kind of thing you can reason your way into. And all of us had lined up behind her assumption, which was that the timing had to be recovered, that somewhere in the ship's memory the original cadence was recorded and could be replayed. We tore the memory apart looking for it. It was not there. The ship had not saved its operator's rhythm any more than a person saves their own pulse. It was 3 in the morning, ship night, in the 3rd week of the 6th month, when Ada stood up from the console she had been failing at for 19 hours, walked to the board with the squeaking marker, and said the sentence the historian would later put at the center of the whole story. "We have been thinking about it wrong," she said. "I was there because I was always there at 3 in the morning. So was Rosa because she could not sleep with a coma patient down the hall. We keep trying to guess the dead crew's rhythm," Ada said. "We cannot. It died with them. So stop trying to match a rhythm the ship remembers. Give it a new one it can learn." Rosa said what all of us thought. "It will not accept a cadence it does not recognize. That is the whole problem." "It did not recognize the first crew either," Ada said. "Not on their first day. The ship learned them. The authentication is not a lock with one key. It is a relationship. It starts empty. This ship started empty. Somewhere in this logic there has to be the state she was in on the day she was built, before she knew anyone, when she would learn whoever spoke to her first. We do not need to break in. We need to find the day she was born and start over." It took 9 more days to find it. Ada, Rosa, and the 22 sheets Rosa had drawn with her own hands, because the Concordat would not send the real ones. They found the maintenance state, the factory condition, the empty room the ship had lived in before she had a crew, and it was buried under 2 centuries of the dead crew's own authorizations, which they had to peel back without tripping the interlocks that would have read the peeling as an attack. Frank rebuilt a junction by hand so they could reach it. Danny held a failing lamp steady for 4 hours in a compartment too small for 2 people so that Ada had light. And at the end of it, at an hour none of us could later agree on, Ada keyed a first command into a ship that had forgotten every hand that ever touched her, slowly, in a plain human rhythm, teaching her a new heartbeat the way you teach a word to a child. The Corps did not reject it. It answered. We did not light it that night. I would not let them. "Not yet," I said again, and made them run the ignition on bench logic 100 times before I would let it near real containment. Because I had understood something the others had felt, but not said, which was that we would get exactly 1 clean chance at surprise, and a botched first burn would tell the whole galaxy what we were doing before the ship could tell it herself. So we rehearsed the resurrection like a quiet thing, and when we finally did it, we did it small. A test. 20 seconds of controlled fusion, throttled to almost nothing, the lowest burn a SARN core can hold, just to prove the sequence would take. Rosa counted it down in the flattest voice she owns. Ada keyed the cadence. And for the first time in 214 years, deep in a dead ship in a nameless scrapyard, a Vekant fusion heart opened its throat and burned. It lasted 20 seconds. It made no sound anyone could hear. It changed nothing anyone could see. And 4 light minutes out, a Concordat navigation buoy that had been counting empty stars for a century caught, at the ragged edge of what it could resolve, a neutrino flux it had no record of and no explanation for, and did the only thing a machine can do with a fact it cannot understand. It flagged it, and it reported it, and it waited for someone to look. The someone was a Concordat monitoring analyst named Vess, 3 shifts junior and 1 coffee into a slow watch. I have never met Vess. Everything in the next stretch comes from the file Vess sent Tone and Tone sent me, and from the historian who checked it afterward against the buoy log. And it holds up. When the buoy's flag came up on the board, the reading made so little sense that the first thing Vess did was assume the instrument was broken, which was the correct first move, because the signature was low and short and sat close to the noise floor at that range. Vess ran the diagnostic on the buoy. The buoy was fine. Vess ran the flux profile against the class library, and the library came back Sarn heavy cruiser on the neutrino spectrum alone, which is the one part of a fusion signature you cannot fake and cannot hide. And Vess laughed, because that was impossible, and filed it as a sensor ghost, which is what analysts file when the sky tells them something they are not allowed to believe. But Vess was conscientious in the way junior people are before their institutions teach them not to be. And so Vess did the second thing, which was to cross-check the sector's asset history, and the asset history returned one line that stopped the laughing. Ho, Kavu 9, Sarn heavy cruiser, disposed to buyer C. Merrick, scrap price 7 months prior. Vess sat with that for a while. A ship the Concordat had certified as dead scrap, sold to a human for the value of its metal, was producing a fusion signature it should not have been able to produce if every word of its own disposal file was true. Vess did not have the authority to do much. What Vess did was write it up honestly, attach the buoy data, and route it up the chain with a plain note, the kind of note that ends careers or starts them, depending on whether the sky was lying. The scrapped Sarn in Sector 19 is generating power. Recommend assessment review. That note climbed. It reached a district desk, and the district desk did what districts do with impossible reports from junior analysts, which was nothing for 6 days, until a supervisor with a slow afternoon opened it and saw the hull number and remembered dimly a retired engineer who had made a scene about that exact ship in a windowless room 7 months before. And so the report was forwarded, not up, but sideways, to the office of the chief assessor for the Thren district, with a one-line query attached that a younger official had written half as a joke. Please confirm asset Kavu 9 remains non-recoverable. Drael Vorkessen read that line at his desk on an ordinary morning, and he did the thing he did when a fact arrived that his career could not fit. He read it 3 times, then he read it again. He pulled the buoy data himself. He looked at the Sarn signature, low and clean and real, coming out of a scrapyard at the edge of the map where a human he had filed as a fool had towed a dead ship 7 months earlier. And Drael Vorkessen, who had been correct 9,000 times, wrote back the sentence that would be quoted against him for the rest of Concordat history. 3 words: calm, certain, and wrong. Sensor error, reassess. The buoy could not reassess because the buoy had not made an error, so it returned the identical reading, and the desk returned it to Drael. And Drael, who could no more accept that a human had lit a Sarn core than he could accept that a corpse had sat up on his table, wrote the same 3 words a second time. And the second time he wrote them was the moment, though he would not understand this for months, that the Concordat's problem stopped being a sensor and started being history. Sensor error, reassess. He told me later that he never once checked whether the buoy had been serviced. He told me that is the part he cannot get past, not the error, the fact that he did not look. Out at the yard, we had no idea the buoy had seen us, and it would not have changed what we did if we had known, because what we did next was the only thing left to do, which was to stop testing and start building, to take a ship that could burn for 20 seconds and make her burn long enough to move. That took 2 more months, and it is where the impatient one nearly ruined everything, but that comes later. What matters is that far away, an old engineer named Tone received a quiet message from a junior analyst named Vess, who had gone looking, off the record, for anyone in the Concordat who had ever gone on record saying the ship was not dead, and had found exactly one name in the minutes of a meeting no one remembered. Tone read the buoy data. Tone read Drail's two identical replies: sensor error, reassess, sensor error, reassess. And the old engineer, who had told a windowless room that the Corps was only sleeping and had been outvoted, did not feel triumphant, because he was too old and had been right about too many bad things to enjoy being right about one more. He wrote 4 words back to Vess and closed the file. He is waking her. We almost lost it all in the 8th month, and it was not the reactor and not the Concordat that nearly did it. It was one of our own. The ship could burn now for as long as we fed her, throttled low, sealed, safe. What she could not yet do was move, because moving 900 meters of hull means bringing the main drive online. And the main drive means coupling an awakened core to 2 centuries of dormant engineering that had never been tested under thrust. That is not a power problem. That is a load problem. A hull that has hung slack in a berth for 214 years has never had to carry its own structure in compression along the spine. And every seal, every frame, every junction on that ship was about to be asked a question nobody had asked it since before the last crew died. So I drew a hard line around it. Nobody fires the drive, I said, until every breach is triple sealed and every soul on this yard is in a suit at a station. Because the first time we push her, if something lets go, it lets go at a scale none of us has ever worked with. We do it once. We do it right. Not before. Not yet. There was a man on the extended crew by then, a contract fusion tech named Petrov, whom Tom had brought on for the last hard push. Competent, ambitious, and privately convinced that my caution was an old man's fear dressed up as discipline. Petrov had watched the core light, he had watched it hold, and he had decided, in the way certain people always decide inside every careful operation, that the group was too slow, that the ship was ready, and that the person who proved it would be remembered as the one who was decisive while the others dithered. On a shift when I was station-side chasing a creditor and Rosa was asleep for the first time in 3 days, Petrov brought the main drive up alone. He did it cleanly at first. The core answered the cadence Ada had taught it, because Ada had taught the new heartbeat to all of us by then, Petrov included, on purpose. Because a ship you cannot start without one specific person is a ship that kills that person's crew the day she gets sick. The drive spun up. For about 40 seconds, it looked like Petrov was right, and in those 40 seconds he composed, in his head, the account he would give of how he had moved the ship the others were afraid of. Then breach 4, which Frank had sealed twice and flagged as needing a third pass, let go under a thrust load it had never carried. Rosa had been right about the word, and I have never once forgotten it since. That seal did not fail from weight. There is no weight out there. It failed from shear along the aft spine, a load case that nothing in 2 centuries had ever asked it to take, applied for 38 seconds by a man who had not read the flag. The ship began to vent. I want to be precise about what happened next, because the story got told wrong afterward, and I have heard the wrong version from people who should know better. The cadence did not refuse Petrov. The authentication worked exactly as designed, and it authenticated a fool. What saved us was downstream of that, and stupider and better. Ada had spent a month teaching the Corps to trust a differential pressure trip on the aft spine. 6 seal lines a Vekant warship had no reason to care about, watched only because Ada put them there. When breach 4 opened, that trip read the pressure drop and dumped the drive in 9 milliseconds, before the thrust could tear the aft third of the hull apart. It did not know Petrov was reckless. It knew a number moved. I came back to a venting cruiser, a blown seal, a month of work destroyed, and a contractor who had nearly killed the whole enterprise and was already at the airlock explaining that it had almost worked, that he had proven she could move, that the failure was Frank's seal and not his judgment. I did not shout. I looked at the damage, and I looked at Petrov, and I said 4 sentences, quietly. You fired a drive with the crew unstationed. You did it because you wanted to be the one. Ada built that trip to protect this ship from exactly one thing, which is a man who thinks the rules are for people slower than him. Get off my yard. Petrov left believing, to the end, that he had been the only one with the nerve to act. The historian interviewed him 4 years later and told me he tells that version still, that he has read the reprimand I filed on him over and over and concludes each time that he was punished for boldness. He has never once concluded the true thing, which is that he risked 5 other lives to be remembered, and that the ship was saved by a number, and by the woman who decided that number was worth watching. It cost us a month we did not have. Frank did breach 4 a third time, and a fourth, wordless, and this time it held. Rosa recertified every SEAL on the ship because she would not now trust any of them on one man's say-so. And that recertification is the reason we are alive, and I will get to why. And the delay, which felt like a disaster, turned out to be the thing that saved us, because it meant the ship was not moving on the day the Concordat finally sent someone to look, and it meant she was sealed and crewed and stationed 3 weeks later, on the day a different kind of message reached the yard, the kind nobody rehearses for, the kind that turns a private resurrection into a public fact. It came in on the distress band. A Concordat colony transport called the Merrick, 600 meters of her, 3,040 souls aboard, had taken a cascade reactor failure 11 hours into a transit that carried her past the gas giant our rock orbits. She was adrift. She was losing life support. She was tumbling, and she was falling into the well, with hours of margin and no Concordat naval vessel closer than 9 hours out. The nearest hull of any kind capable of taking that many people off a dying ship. The only hull within reach sat in a scrapyard on a nameless rock, 90% rebuilt, 4 months short of Rosa's own estimate, sealed, crewed by 6, and had never once flown. Tom read the numbers off the board in the flat voice of a man reading a sentence. 3,040 people, he said, 9 hours from help, 40,000 kilometers. We are 40 minutes from them. I stood in the galley with a cup of the yard's bad coffee going cold in my hand, and everyone in that room understood that the 20-second test, the 4%, the heartbeat, 10 months of nights, had all been leading to a question I had said I would only answer once. Rosa asked it for all of them. Cal, she said, she has never flown. I set the coffee down. Then this is the once, I said. We flew her 19 minutes later. It took 19 minutes to get 6 people into suits, onto the ship, and the core from holding burn to flight ready. And every one of those minutes was a lifetime, because a colony transport was falling toward a gas giant with 3,040 people aboard, and the only thing coming for them was a resurrected ghost that had never left the yard. Rosa was in the reactor gallery. Ada was at the control station with her hand on the new heartbeat. Frank was at damage control. Tom was on comms. Danny, 19 years old, was in the launch bay because someone had to run the shuttle cradle, and he was the only one left. And I sat in the command chair of a Vekant heavy cruiser that a chief assessor had certified as scrap, and gave the flattest order of my life. Ada, I said, wake her all the way. Ada keyed the cadence. The core opened its throat. Kabu 9 came off the yard for the first time in 214 years, and she did not stagger and she did not falter, because the crew that woke her had taught her patience before they taught her power. And a ship that learns patience first does not panic when it finally runs. 40,000 kilometers is nothing, and it is also a very long way to fall in a chair. We did it the only honest way you can do it when you intend to stop at the far end. 20 minutes accelerating at 3 gravities, flip. 20 minutes standing on the brakes at 3 gravities. 35 kilometers a second at the turnover, and every gram of it given back. 3 gravities is what Rosa's recertification bought us. It was not what the ship could take. It was what Rosa was willing to sign for on seals she had personally put her hands on 11 days earlier. And when I asked her for 4, she said 3, and I took 3. Because the whole of this story is that I listened to my engineer. 40 minutes, 30. On the Marin, the captain, a Thren named Orlu, had already given the order no captain wants to give, which was to move 3,000 people toward life pods that hold 900, and had begun the arithmetic captains do at the end. The arithmetic of who? He told me about it himself a year afterward, and I am not going to dress it up. Then his board lit with a contact. One hull, 900 meters, Sarn class, and Orlu, who had spent his life in Concordat space, said the thing the whole galaxy would repeat after him. I know what that is. I did not know they had it. We came alongside a dying transport and did the unglamorous, enormous work that the reveal turned out to be. Not a battle, a rescue. Matching a tumble is not reactor work, and I want that right, because people who were not there keep saying it was. Matching a tumble is thruster work and control loop work, and Ada wrote that loop in 11 minutes off a hull she had been reading for 10 months. And Rosa fed the attitude bank off the main loop at a throttle setting nobody had written a number for, because the number was not in any manual, because we had no manuals, because the Concordat had told us twice that technical records for assets designated non-recoverable are not retained. Rosa held it against the ceiling she had chalked on her own board and did not go past it. Then we opened the flight bays, which had held Vekant fighters 2 centuries ago, and now held nothing but empty space to fill with frightened people. And here is the thing nobody asks about, and I lay awake on for a week afterward. We had rebuilt life support for 6 compartments. 6. Not 900 meters. 6. Because that is what 77,000 grams short buys you. The flight bays had pressure and heat and nothing else. No scrubbing, no circulation, nothing recycling anything. So we did it on stored atmosphere and a clock. Frank blew every reserve tank on the ship into the 2 forward bays, and Rosa put the number on the loop for everybody to hear, because a number everybody can hear is worth more than a number one person is carrying. 3,000 bodies in unscrubbed volume, carbon dioxide climbing, 4 hours and 11 minutes before the air in those bays stopped being air. 4 hours and 11 minutes to load them, break off, and be somewhere with scrubbers. That was the actual rescue, not the arrival, the clock. Danny ran the cradle. Frank held the seals. We took them off in waves, 900 at a time into a hull built to carry 4,000. And every wave was 26 minutes of cradle cycles, and Danny did not miss one. At 19, on his first day off the rock. It was not clean. The Marin's tumble worsened as her forward mass shifted, and the gas giant's pull grew, and there was a stretch of 11 minutes when the transport's own hull began to fail, and Ada had to hold Kavu 9 so close to a disintegrating ship that a single throttle error would have killed everyone on both. And Rosa, in the reactor gallery, felt the core ask for more than she had ever given it, and gave it, one careful increment at a time, and never once past the chalk. The last wave came aboard as the Marin crossed the point of no return, and began, slowly, to fall. I held my ship against a dying transport until Danny's voice came over the loop, thin and cracking. All aboard! All aboard! Count is complete. And only then did I give the second order of the day, as flat as the first. Break off! Take us home! And Kavu 9 peeled away from the gas giant's well with 3,040 living people in a hull that had been a tomb. And behind her the Marin finished its long fall into the clouds and was gone. And everyone who would have died on it was instead crowded into the corridors of a resurrected warship, alive and stunned and safe. We made the yard with 51 minutes on the air clock. Far away, the Concordat's response was arriving, and it arrived, as it always did, exactly too late to matter, and exactly in time to be humiliating. A naval squadron under a Vekant admiral named Sarnvoss, no relation to the ship's class, had been scrambled the moment the Marin's distress went out, and it was still 4 hours from the scene when Admiral Sarnvoss received the report that the transport was lost with all hands. And then, 90 seconds later, the correction, that the transport was lost with no hands, that 3,040 souls had been taken off by an unregistered Sarn-class cruiser operating out of human space. And the admiral, who had a squadron and a doctrine and a career built on the certainty that the galaxy's heavy metal was accounted for, gave the order that generals give when reality has outrun them. "Intercept and hold the unknown cruiser," he said. "Confirm its origin. Under no circumstances let it leave the sector until we understand what it is." That order went out at the speed of light, and light was faster than his squadron and slower than the fact. It reached a sector that Kavu 9 had left before he ever wrote it. His ships arrived 4 hours later to an empty patch of space and a debris trail from a transport with nobody in it. And on Thren Station, in an office that had certified that ship as scrap, a message was already climbing toward Chief Assessor Drael Vorkessen. And this one did not say "censor error," and Drael would not be able to answer it in 3 words, because the sky was no longer telling him something he could file. It was telling him something 3,040 people had just lived through. The Concordat did what large institutions do when a fact becomes too large to file. It commissioned an assessment. The difference this time was that they asked for an honest one, and honesty, it turned out, was more expensive than any of the options it was meant to price. I did not see that report for a year, and I only saw it because Yeln handed it to me himself and said, "Read this. It is the only thing we did right." It landed on the desk of the sector's senior administrator, a Vekant named Coordinator Yeln, and it was written by a team who had been told, for once, not to reach a comfortable conclusion. It read like an indictment because it was one. A Sarn-class heavy cruiser, Ho Kavu 9, certified non-recoverable and disposed at scrap price 10 months prior, was now operational, privately owned, and had executed a mass rescue that no Concordat naval asset had been positioned to attempt. The ship was legally, permanently, and unambiguously the property of the human buyer under Salvage Law Article 9. The same article the Concordat had used for centuries to keep sellers from clawing back scrap when metal prices rose. There was no legal mechanism to reclaim it. There was no honest way to call it scrap. And there were 3,040 living witnesses, colonists of 9 species, who owed their lives to the fact that the Concordat had been wrong. Yeln convened a closed session and laid the options on the table, one at a time, and the honest assessment killed each one as it landed. "Seize the ship," someone said. "On what grounds?" Yeln asked. "It was sold under our own law, cleanly, for the price we set. To seize it, we would have to argue in open court that our own disposal was fraudulent, which means arguing that our assessments cannot be trusted, which is the one thing this entire institution runs on. We would win the ship and lose the assessments, and the assessments are worth more than any ship. Rejected. Discredit the human," someone else said. "Question the rescue." Yeln almost laughed and did not, because there were 3,040 witnesses, and a Thren captain named Orlu who had already given a statement, on the record, that began with a sentence everyone was now quoting. "I know what that is. I did not know they had it." Rejected. "Buy it back," a third voice said. "Offer him a fortune, whatever a working Sarn is worth." Yeln considered that one longer, because it was the only option that did not require the Concordat to admit anything in public. And then he rejected it too, for a reason that showed he had finally understood the shape of the thing. "If we buy it back," he said, "we are not buying a ship. We are buying silence about the fact that a human did in a scrapyard what our Navy could not do with a squadron. And a man who spent everything he had to prove a point does not sell the point. He will take our offer as proof that we are afraid, because we will be, and he will be right. Rejected. It was at that session, with every option dead on the table, that the old engineer's words came back into the room, because Yeln had done his reading, and he had found in the archived minutes of a district meeting 10 months earlier a single dissent, formally recorded and formally overruled, from a retired advisor named Tone. Yeln read it aloud because he wanted the room to hear the shape of what they had done. "You did not assess a dead ship," Tone had said. "You assessed a sleeping one, and wrote dead because dead is cheaper to file. Dead is a paperwork word." The room was quiet after that, the specific quiet of professionals, recognizing that the one person they had outvoted had been the only one in the building who was awake. Yeln let the quiet sit. Then he said the thing that turned the whole affair from a loss into a lesson, which is the most any institution can hope for once it has already been wrong in front of everyone. "We have exactly one asset left in this," he said. "Not the ship. We have lost the ship. What we have is the chance to be seen deciding what to do about having been wrong. We can fight the human and lose in public and slowly, or we can go to him, in person, without lawyers, and find out what he actually wants. Because a man who could have sold that ship to any navy in the galaxy and instead used it to save a Thren transport for free is not a man whose price is money. Find out his price. It will not be a number. Send someone he cannot dismiss. Send the assessor who signed the disposal." And so the request came out to a scrapyard on a nameless rock. Not a summons and not an offer, but the one thing that Concordat had never before extended to a human operation on the edge of the map. A request, plainly worded, from the office of the sector coordinator that Cal Merrick, sole proprietor, agreed to meet and talk. I read it in the galley with the whole crew watching and a cup of the same bad coffee in my hand. I read it once, which for me means I understood it. Rosa asked what it said. "They want to talk," I said. I set it down next to the two identical replies still pinned to the wall. "Technical records for assets designated non-recoverable are not retained." The ones that had told us no twice in the same sentence. And I looked at them for a moment, and I thought about 22 sheets of paper Rosa drew because that sentence existed. "Tell them yes," I said. "Tell them to send the man who signed the paper." We met on neutral ground, a Concordat administrative station halfway between the human edge and Thren, in a conference room that had a window, which after a year of windowless dealings struck me as almost a courtesy. They sent Coordinator Yeln, 2 aides, and, at my specific request, Chief Assessor Drael Vorkessen. I brought Rosa for the law and came otherwise alone, which Yeln understood as a message and Drael did not, yet. The first hour was logistics, and they gave ground on all of it, cheerfully, the way you concede small things to soften a large refusal you are about to hear. They waived every fee Grask had ever invented. They granted Kavu 9 a full civil registration, the first Vekant warship ever registered to a human owner. They offered a fusion-grade parts supply line to the yard at cost, an apology dressed as a contract, and I will tell you plainly that the line at cost is the reason we are still solvent, because it took 4 years to clear 70,000 grams of debt, and it would have taken 9 at retail. They conceded 4 things, and then 5, and I accepted each with a nod and no gratitude, because generosity on the small things is the sound an institution makes while it works up to asking for the one thing that matters. Yeln finally asked for it. "We are prepared to be extraordinarily generous," Coordinator Yeln said, "in exchange for a single administrative correction." The disposal record for hull Kavu 9 currently reads that the asset was certified non-recoverable and sold at scrap. In light of subsequent events, that record is embarrassing to this institution. We would like to amend it. To reclassify the sale as a specialized restoration contract, jointly credited, so that the record reflects a partnership rather than a mistake. In return, name your figure. There it was, not the ship, the story. They had understood, at last, that terms outlived the people who signed them, and that the only thing they could still win was the record of who had been right. I did not answer right away. I asked Yeln and the aides to give me and one other man the room. No aides, no recording, and Yeln, who is a better man than the institution he serves, agreed, and it came down to the two of us alone in a room with a window, the assessor and the fool. You want to change what dead means? I said. Drayle did not pretend otherwise. I want to change one line in a file, he said. That is all. You keep the ship, you keep the money, you keep the rescue and the glory and the registration. I am asking for one sentence. I looked at him for a while. You signed the paper that said she was dead, I said. You were wrong. Everybody is wrong sometimes. I have been wrong about 10,000 things. If all you wanted was to be right, I would give it to you, because being right is cheap, and I do not need it. He waited, because he had heard the word if. But that is not what you are asking, I said. You are asking to make the record say she was never really dead, that this was always a restoration, that the Concordat knew. And if I let you do that, then no assessor ever has to answer for the word dead again, because dead will just mean not yet profitable. And the next 4,000 crew whose ship gets written off in an afternoon will get written off by a man who knows the record has always been amended when the ship turns out to still be breathing. I will not sign that. You do not get to change what dead means. You get to be wrong about it in public, the way I would have had to be wrong in public if she had never flown. And I want you to understand that I mean that, because for 9 of those 10 months, the honest odds were that I would be the one standing in the wrong file. That is the deal I made with the ship. The record stands. He sat with that, an old assessor who had been correct 9,000 times, and wrong the one time it was written in a hull number he will carry to the end. And I watched him understand that I was not punishing him. I was refusing him something for a reason larger than the room. What do you want then? He asked finally. If not the money and not the record amended. I reached into my jacket and set a thing on the table between us. Small, ordinary, a physical object in a room full of abstractions. It was the stenciled section of hull the Concordat had cut from Cavu 9 for testing. The piece with the glyph that means condemned. The one Danny had painted over with ugly gray primer. I had cut it out and kept it. Register her under her own number, I said. Cavu 9. Not a new name, not a human name. The number your people gave her when she was a warship, and the number on the file when you called her scrap. And leave the record exactly as it is, both parts, the part where you condemned her and the part where she flew. I do not want you to look better. I want the file to be true. I slid the section of hull across the table. And take this back, I said. You marked her condemned. I am giving you the mark. You can keep it in a drawer and remember, or you can throw it away and forget, but it is yours, because you are the one who has to decide what it means, and I am done deciding for you. He took the piece of hull. He signed the registration, Cavu 9, Owner C. Merrick, Class Sarn Heavy Cruiser, status operational, disposal record unamended, all of it standing, the wrong and the right together in one true file. And when he walked out of that room, he was carrying a painted-over piece of a ship he had called dead. And he did not put it in a drawer, though he told himself he would. He told me that 4 years later, in the same room, and it was the only time I ever saw him look relieved. It did not end with a signature, because stories that change how a galaxy sees a species never end with a signature. They end, if they end at all, in the small recalculations that ripple outward through people who were never in the room. Within a year, 3 Vekant shipyards quietly began hiring human contractors, not out of charity, but because a species that can cold start a Sarn core in a scrapyard is a species you want on your reactor floor. The Concordat's salvage doctrine was revised, without announcement, to require that any hull certified non-recoverable be logged as dormant pending survey, and the word dead was struck from the disposal template entirely, replaced by a longer and more honest phrase that no assessor liked and every assessor now uses. Insurance underwriters across 4 species recalculated the value of derelict hulls in the human sphere and stopped writing them to zero, which cost the guilds a great deal of money and made a great many derelicts worth cutting that had not been worth cutting the month before. None of those people had met me. All of them had heard the sentence. Nobody bid on it. And every one of them, filing their small revised judgments, was quietly making sure that the next time somebody would. Tone lived to see it, which not everyone in his position does. Vess, the junior analyst who had refused to file the truth as a ghost, went to see him near the end and told him he had been right, that the whole institution now knew he had been right, that his overruled dissent was being taught to new assessors as the thing they must never do again. I have this from Vess, who wrote it down that same night and sent it to me 2 years later without a note attached. Tone listened to all of it from a chair he no longer easily left. "They are teaching that I was right," he said. "Yes," Vess said. "Then teach them the rest of it," Tone said. "Being right about a bad assessment is not the same as winning." I told a room the Corps was sleeping, and the room voted, and the vote did not care what I knew. 4,000 crew died on that ship 2 centuries before I ever saw her file, and being right about her did not bring back one of them. And being right about the second 3,000 did not save them either. A human did that, with his hands, at 3 in the morning, in a bad room. I only talked. Do not teach them to be the one who was right. Teach them to be the one who does the work at 3 in the morning. He did not say it bitterly. He said it the way an old man states a fact he has finally made peace with. And Vess wrote it down because Vess had by then decided to become the person who writes things down. The yard itself did not change much, which is the truest thing about it. I was 60 by then and slow in the hands as ever, and Halloran and Merrick salvage still sat on a rock with no name and a docking ring held together by improvisation and spite, except that now a 900-meter cruiser hung in its sky, registered, legal, and quiet. We did not get rich, and I want to be exact about that, because people assume otherwise, and the assumption annoys me. We never sold her. A working Sarn is worth more than everything human space has ever sold the Concordat combined, and that number is worth exactly nothing to a man who will not sell, which makes it the most expensive object in the human sphere and the least liquid. What we did was pay off 70,000 grams of debt over 4 years out of tow contracts, salvage jobs, and one very large recovery fee from an underwriter who had written a derelict to zero and been persuaded at length to reconsider. We fixed the yard's own reactor properly at last. Frank got the second surgery his lung had needed for a decade. Rosa turned down offers from 3 shipyards and stayed because she had helped teach a dead thing a new heartbeat and did not want to work anywhere that would not understand why that mattered. Ada took an apprentice. Tom got older. And Danny, the dock rat who had painted over the word condemned because he thought it was ugly, was 21 and a licensed fusion technician, the youngest in the human sphere, certified on Vekant cores by an examiner who had not wanted to certify a human and had run out of reasons. I keep my own small thing in a drawer next to the assessment file. It is a photograph, an actual printed one, of 6 people in dirty suits standing in front of a ship that had never flown, taken the night before it did. I do not look at it often. I know it is there. The chronicler came 4 years after the rescue, a historian named Ober, who was writing the definitive account and had interviewed everyone, Yeln and Orlu and Vess and Tone before he passed, Grask, who still resented it, and Petrov, who still misremembers it. He came to the yard last because the good ones always save the center for last, and he sat with me in the galley over the same bad coffee that machine has been making for 20 years. and he asked the question he had come a long way to ask. Of everything, Ober said, all of it, the core, the language, the rescue. If you had to name the one decision that changed everything, what was it? I thought about it for a while, which he appreciated, because the people who answer fast have usually decided what they want the story to be. Everybody thinks it was buying her, I said. It was not. Buying a dead ship is easy. Any fool with scrap money can buy a dead ship. And I was that fool, and the price was 41,000 grams, and I can show you the receipt. The decision that changed everything was smaller than that, and it was not even mine. I nodded at the wall of the shop, where the two identical concordat replies are still pinned, next to a patch of gray primer over a glyph that means condemned. A kid on my crew painted over the word they stamped on her, I said. Nobody told him to. He did it because he thought it was ugly, and he never once claimed it meant anything, and it did not mean anything until it meant everything. That is the decision. Somebody looked at the word they put on her, the word that told the whole galaxy she was worth nothing, and instead of arguing with it, he just quietly covered it up and got back to work. Everything else was arithmetic. That part was a choice. Ober wrote it down. Then he asked the last thing, the closing thing, the thing the chronicler always asks. When you saw that listing, he said, the one that said, no bids, what did you think? And I looked out the galley port at the enormous quiet shape of Kavu 9 hanging in the sky of a rock with no name, 63 years old and slow in the hands, and owner of the only Vekant warship ever registered to a human, and I gave him the last line of the whole account, the line that closed the file, the line that had opened it on a Tuesday 11 days into a countdown that nobody else was watching. I thought the same thing everybody thought, I said. Nobody bid on it. And then I thought, somebody should.